great to be with you. Linda didn't have to twist my arm much to get me to come back to the Smoky Mountain District. And thanks for the snow. We have not had much of that in Huntersville, so it was nice to see that when I got here. And I bet you all wish it would just go away. So I want to begin by getting you all to talk around your tables for just a couple of minutes. And what I want you to share is, why do you like being a United Methodist? Why do you like being a United Methodist? I mean, you could be anything you wanted to be, but you've chosen to be a United Methodist. You've chosen to take a Saturday morning and to be here to talk about the future of our denomination. So think for a minute about what it is that you like about the United Methodist Church, and share that around your tables for a second. Things that you lifted up at your tables. Inclusivity, okay? What else? Grace, absolutely. Grace. Other things?
Unity.
Unity? Okay. Others?
Focus on love.
Love? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes?
I like the mission work
Okay.
within our borders of the United States and then without.
Okay. So the ways we live out our faith, both here in the United States and then throughout the world. Absolutely. Other things?
Heritage.
Heritage. Absolutely. We've come a long way.
I've always liked the diversity of our church and the fact that we try to make space for everybody.
Okay, the diversity,
Always
making
been
space.
a part of it in my mind.
Okay, making space for everybody. Good ones. When I think about that, I think first and foremost of grace. I think about how I just love that we talk about holiness of heart, building a deep and abiding relationship with Jesus Christ, but then holiness of life and going out and making this world look a little bit more like God's kingdom. I love that we were involved early on and have continued to be involved in helping children and with education and with healthcare and hospitals, and then also helping those who are growing older. We've run the gamut as we've tried to live out the Christian life. And I do also like that we have been a big tent. The church I grew up in was a pretty large membership church, and there was this wonderful group of charismatics when we first joined there when I was like in 7th grade. And what was so interesting to me is that they believed in speaking in tongues, and they raised their hands in praise, which wasn't something that anybody else did in this congregation, but they were embraced. And they were loved, and it just taught me that it was okay to do things differently as long as we kept the main thing. And so it's one of the things that I have loved, and one of the things I'm probably most concerned about in the future of the United Methodist Church. But I start there because, the protocol, our view on the inclusion of LGBTQI plus people is not the only thing that we as Methodists are about. Certainly that's been at the forefront. It's been probably one of the most contentious areas that we've had over the past several years or even several decades, but there's still great things going on, and I want us to remember that as we move through this discussion today. And I'm going to try to give you the best information I can, and if you have questions, there are cards in your folders, but we'll also have some time if you need to where you can raise your hand as well. So the reason that we're here is I was in this district just seems like a year, maybe a year and a half ago, because we thought that in February of 2019 we were going to go to a special session of General Conference in St. Louis, and we were going to solve our controversy, and then we could move forward. And that did not happen, did it? In fact, it was probably one of the United Methodist Church at its worst, as far as our witness to the world. Not a good time. It was rancorous. There were things said to other people that were harmful. It just wasn't United Methodism at its best. And immediately following that session, groups began to think about, well, we didn't really accomplish much here. So what kind of plans can we have? It looked like that possibly dividing was the only way. And so several different groups began to propose more plans. about how we might divide or what we might do. And they range anywhere from having a United Methodist Church and allowing a group to split to dividing into 4 different denominations and more. And so these were all coming out. There are actually 12 plans that are before the General Conference to think about and talk about and wonder about. And yet Bishop Muyambo from Africa got together a group of diverse people from all the theological spectrums. And he did this pretty quickly after the special session, and then they began to meet. They were pretty quiet about it for a while, and then they came up with what is now being called the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace through Separation. The Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace through Separation. Now, I want us to start with a litany because I want us to remember, there are a couple things I want you to take with you, but this is the first one. This is just a proposal. It is not a done deal, okay? Even though media tried to tell us that, it's not. So I want us to start with the litany. Hopefully you can see this, but I think that you'll just remember it. We'll practice it once. We will remember that it's just a proposal. Even when the Washington Post reports that the United Methodist Church is expected to split over gay marriage, we will remember that it's just a proposal. And when the New York Times declares that our United Methodist Church has announced plans to split over same-sex marriage, we will remember that it's just a proposal. And when Facebook, of course, or Twitter or Instagram make it sound like separation is a done deal, we will remember that it's just a proposal. Amen? Amen. Amen. So it's just a proposal. And what we wanted to do is give you as much information as we can about that proposal. It's something that the delegates will be looking at among lots of other things. But I think it's something that has given lots of places in the church some hope that we truly might find a way to move forward so that we can decide maybe and then move forward in doing things that God's calling us to do. This has kind of stymied us, has paralyzed us for a long time, and I don't know that the Methodist Church has been a great witness. And so I think God's calling us to move back into that. So I want to start with some givens as we gather together today and as I share today. And the first one is that we disagree over our interpretation of the Bible, particularly those passages that refer to homosexuality. We disagree over the biblical interpretation of the passages that refer to homosexuality. That is a given. It is what it is, and that's what's brought us to this point. But I think we have to remember that. Shared with a couple people earlier, and last week when I was over in the Yadkin Valley District, I'm really tired of getting correspondence that starts with this: if you would just read your Bible. Like I don't. Like you don't. Like, if you disagree with me, clearly you're not reading your Bible. Or, on the other side, they are just homophobic. Their hearts are full of hate, and maybe we'd be glad if they were gone. Okay? Folks, we got to stop treating each other this way. We disagree over biblical interpretation, but what we're doing is spewing hate at each other. And not only does that do harm to us, but what does it do to our witness in the world? I mean, would you want to join the United Methodist Church right now? I'll go and be a part of it and see what they call me. And I think we have to remember that people out in the world are watching, and they're wondering, and they don't know what to expect. When my mother's pastor at our home church got ready to retire, he did a wonderful newsletter article, and it was sent out when we used to send out newsletters. And in it, he said everything he had ever wanted to say to the congregation, because he was retiring. Yeah, it was interesting. But one thing he said to me it stuck with me ever since I read it, and that was probably about 37 years ago. And that was this: when the compassion inside the church exceeds the compassion that people find in the world, it's then that the church will grow. When the compassion inside the church exceeds the compassion that people find out in the world, it's then that the church will grow. And I just have to believe that if we could treat each other with kindness, if we could seek to understand rather than first be understood, that we would give a much better witness than we have been by pitting each side against each other. And, I wonder whether the question could be rather, why don't you interpret it like I do? Couldn't the question be, well, explain to me how you've come to your understanding? To seek to understand, rather to be understood. So that's a given. We disagree. It was hoped, as I said before, that the special session would provide a way forward, but the conference was filled with vitriol and anger, and harm has been done. Harm has been done not only to people, but harm has been done to the United Methodist Church. And that's something that we have to repent, and we have to ask forgiveness for, and we have to move forward. But those are the givens, at least for me, as we begin our time together. So, as I said before, the protocol is just one of several plans that people are sending forth in order to help us find a way forward. There's the Indianapolis plan. It's officially titled New Denominations of United Methodism, and that would split us into 3 denominations: a traditionalist, a centrist, and a progressive denomination. There's the New Expressions Worldwide, which is put forward by a group that calls themselves UN Forward, and they want us to split into 4 denominations: a traditional, a centrist, a progressive, and a liberationist denomination. And then the Next Generation plan assumes that we stay together, but then gives lots of leeway for churches that want to move out and maybe start something different. So those are the big ones. They're the ones that were put forward by groups, but as I said, there are 9 more that people have put forward that we will be taking a look at too, in addition to the protocol. So there'll be a lot going on in General Conference. So I want to start, as we talk about the protocol, about how this all got started. There was a mediation team. 16 people signed it, the mediation agreement that we now call the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace through separation. Bishop Yamasu got together with some of the Central Conference bishops. Now, a little bit of a Methodism. We have annual conferences and jurisdictions here in the United States. It's how we divide up our church. And what jurisdiction are we in? Southeast, right. Outside of the United States, we're divided up into annual conferences and then central conferences. So the central conferences kind of mimic our jurisdictions in a way. They're a little bit bigger, but they kind of mimic that. So the Central Conference bishop got a group together in July in Chicago to begin to talk about, is there a way that we could compromise and help us move forward? Progressives, traditionalists, centrists, all sorts of people from all over the spectrum. And the group was pretty large at first, and then they asked the group to pare themselves down and have people represent them, just because it was a little bit unwieldy if they were going to come to an agreement. And so they pared it down, and it turned out to be 16 people, and then they brought some other folks in as experts. But the other thing to remember is these folks were all volunteer. They went to those meetings on their own dime. Nobody paid for them to go. They had no budget. So if they met in a hotel room, they had to figure out among them how they were going to pay for that hotel room. And they really had no authority. The General Conference hadn't asked them to come together, but they came together out of their love for the United Methodist Church and really wanting to figure out a way forward, because they knew that we did a lot more good than we were really talking about right now. And that's the group that gathered together. And they decided as they got going that they needed a mediator. And so one of the conference chancellors, I think it was Michigan, but don't quote me on that, but Michigan Chancellor knew Kenneth Feinberg. You ever heard of Kenneth Feinberg? Okay, and he's helped us with lots of mediation in our United States, and he agreed to come and be a part of the mediation, and he agreed to do it pro bono. because he felt like the Methodist Church still has an important witness to give. And so he wanted to help. And I love what one of the bishops says. And that's, he says, you know, you have to wonder what happens when a person who's outside of your village, Kenneth Feinberg is a practicing Jew, but when someone outside of your village sees more in you than maybe you do, has more hope in you than maybe you do, sees a brighter future than you do. And so we give thanks for his work. And he's the one that told the team that 16 would be a good number. Okay? He knew that. So I know that as you read some of the things that come out about the protocol, there are lots of people that wish they could have been a part of that group and feel upset that they weren't. Probably all 862 delegates would have liked to have been a part of that group, but there was no way. So Kenneth led them forward in how mediation would work. And so they used his expertise, and I think we have to trust that. Trust that, you know, he's been doing this for a long time and knew what would work best. And as they came together in their compromise, and it is a compromise, here's what they agreed to. First, that groups would no longer support the plans that they created. Now, these plans are still in the legislation that's coming to General Conference because they were turned in as legislation. You can't take them back. But that the groups would no longer support those plans, but that they would encourage others to support this protocol. Some separation is assumed. They, as they work together, realize that probably right now the only way forward is that there is some separation. And I grieve that. I grieve that, but I'm going to trust as they move forward. They developed legislation that will go to the special session. We didn't put this in your handout, but I brought a couple of copies if any of you just really want to read it. Here it is. So you're welcome to come up afterwards and take it. But they have developed that legislation. And the group agreed to use their best efforts to encourage their constituents, the folks that they knew, to also support the protocol. All right, so here's what the protocol says, kind of in general. And one of the things that we heard even back before February of 2019 from lots of folks is, you know, the worst thing that could happen would be if our church had to vote. The worst thing is our church had to vote. And why do you think they felt that way? Feelings will be hurt. Might split the church. People feel differently. Churches are, you know, composed of lots of different opinions and thoughts. And so the worry was that if we voted and had to separate, we would be weaker than we would have been together. And that still may be the case. Luckily, God helps us to grow. But that was one of the things we heard. So when the protocol came out, what's true about it is that no annual conference has to vote. It does not demand a vote. It doesn't demand a vote of any local church. That doesn't mean votes aren't going to happen, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And if you're a United Methodist and your annual conference votes to separate, you can choose to remain to be a United Methodist. Okay? The default is that you're United Methodist, and you choose to separate if you want to do that. And so your local church can vote, see, I told you there would be votes, can vote to remain United Methodist. And vice versa. If our annual conference votes to remain United Methodist and your local church feels strongly that they want to associate with one of the traditional denominations or a new expression of United Methodism, they can do that. They can vote and do that. And so it works both ways. Now, there is a timeline for this, but it does give us a little bit of time. What I've started telling people is, folks, the day after General Conference, we're not going to just split up, okay? Nothing takes effect until January 1st of 2021 in this proposal. So we've got some time. But there are some deadlines. So if there's a group of people who want to form a new denomination, then they have to register that intent with the Council of Bishops by May 1st of 2021. Okay, so they'll have a whole year people have a whole year to think about whether they want to do that. Then annual conferences can vote if they want to join one of these new expressions of Methodism. They could be traditional expressions. It could be a progressive expression. But an annual conference can vote, doesn't have to, but can vote if they want to move into one of these new expressions of Methodism. And they need to do that by July 1st of 2021, which gives you kind of 2 annual conferences. For most of us, we'll finish general conference in May, we'll have annual conference in June, and then we'd have a whole nother year to, and then move forward to June of 2021. So there are a couple opportunities for annual conferences to vote. Central conferences need a little bit more time. Their annual conferences are on a totally different schedule than ours are, so they're given till the end of 2021 to decide if they want to move to one of the new expressions of United Methodism, and they need to do that by the end of 2021. Okay, if a local church wants to remain part of the United Methodist Church, if an annual conference chooses to separate, then your local church can do that, and they do it this way. Your church council would talk together, or whatever your leadership team is, your church council would say, well, I think we need to have a vote. And so then that church council would decide if that vote needed to be 50% plus 1, or does it need to be a supermajority of 2/3 of the congregation. And then the district superintendent would call a church conference, and the church conference invites every person who's a professing member of your church to come and to vote on whether or not they want to separate or not. And so that's how a local church would do it. So they can vote if they don't like what the annual conference decides, they can vote to do something different. All right, so how have I confused you so far? Track it? Okay, here's the most important part. The affiliation decision must be made by December 31st of when? 2024. Okay, 4 years from now. One of the things I think we need to think about is before your local church decides to affiliate with something else, do you think it would be good to know what that was? Okay, because if you're taking that vote to separate and to join a new expression of United Methodism, it's going to take a little while for that new expression of Methodism to be formed. Now, we have one new expression that's, further on their way than maybe others, but one of the things I hope churches will do will be take a deep breath and just figure out what's happening, figure out, what these new expressions are going to look like and how they're going to be governed and all of that before they just decide, we've just got to get out of here. But really think about what you're joining. And certainly we want you to be where you need to be. But spend some time in prayerful discernment, thinking about that rather than the day after general conference. If it doesn't go the way you want, you gather your church together and do that. Kind of figure out what's out there. And then wait and see. I have a good friend, and he talks about it this way. This whole thing is going to move at the speed of Methodism. And I don't even have to tell you. You all know what that is. So, it will move at the speed of Methodism. So we don't have to move faster than the speed of Methodism. But no, it will move at the speed of Methodism. So if the protocol passes, there are 3 different ways that a local church can choose to exit the United Methodist Church. 3 different ways. 2 of them are already available now, and 1 would be a new way. Okay? So the new way is that churches would be invited to join to become part of that new expression of United Methodism, whichever one that is, whatever it is. And there could be 1, there could be 3, we don't know how many there will be. But churches could decide to do that. And if they decided to do that, then they would take their property and their assets and their liabilities with them. And they would just move into this new expression of United Methodism. Okay, so they would be able to do that. They are expected until that happens.